Hello and welcome to another video from Hollywood Wargaming. And today I have a very special video that I've been meaning to do for a while now, and one that I think is going to be pretty prevalent in the bolt action community, and it is how to build the Band of Brothers starter set. And this was more or less Warlord Games' core starter set to help get new players into bolt action. And a lot of people who do play bolt action start off here. And as a guy who just recently got into Star Wars Legion and busted open a new starter box for a new game, I know how overwhelming it can be at times. And I totally understand why a lot of new players come to the subreddit and other forum communities to ask for help on how to build this. Because really, there are a lot of restrictions you get within this box that kind of mesh somewhat incongruently with the bolt action rules. So I made this video as a sort of guide on how to build your Band of Brothers starter set to maximize your efficiency on the models that exist within this core set and allow you to play fair, balanced, and entertaining games with the contents of this box and this box alone. Now, that being said, I did also take into consideration that many players will expand their armies on top of this box set, and I made sure that the models that I instruct you to build are ones that you're going to be able to find useful later on when you do possess a larger collection and have more options to choose from. So if you have the Band of Brothers starter set or plan on splitting one with a sibling or friend, this video is tailor-made for you. However, if you are looking to get started in bolt action and need a jumping off point, I personally do have some grievances with the Band of Brothers starter set and don't think it's that great of a way to jump into the hobby. I think Warlord is starting to roll out some new starter sets that are just a lot better deals than this, and if you're a solo player who's not splitting the box with somebody, I think some of the other army boxes are just much better buys. Ones that are going to give you a lot more content and list diversity to keep the game fresh over time. But if you and a friend are looking to get into bolt action and you each want to spend under $50 on a starter set, this isn't a bad buy if you can find it on sale. Especially if you're really obsessed with that European theater, kind of D-Day invasion of Normandy, and you really want to play out paratroopers against late war Germans. But let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at the contents of the Band of Brothers starter set. Because to understand our builds and limitations, we're going to need to know what the contents of this box are. So at a standard MSRP rate of $112 US, you're going to be getting 4 US Airborne sprues, 2 German Grenadier sprues, and 1 Hanomag half-track 251-10, which is going to be the light anti-tank gun variant sporting the Pak 36. So that is a total of 12 German infantry models, supported by 1 half-track, and a total of 24 US Airborne infantry models. And honestly, I gotta say, that is just barely enough to actually play a game of bolt action in the most bare-bones sense. But if you are new to bolt action and wargaming as a whole, that's going to be a very small, manageable amount of units that's going to help you grapple with the rules and how units like infantry or light armor are going to interact with each other. And after that, we do get 1 ruined farmhouse terrain set, and while I like how this terrain looks, it is quite long in the tooth, and even as a veteran hobbyist, I did have a lot of trouble kind of putting this thing together. It's a very crude plastic and does not like most glues that you're going to use with it. That being said, it is a decent piece of terrain overall, and it's going to be good for when you play those first early matches on a 2x2 foot square board. But really, starter sets aren't all about models, they are about getting you into the game by giving you the rules and the tools that you need to play it. And this box set does come with the Bolt Action version 2 rulebook and a softback version, and a very handy rules reference sheet that's going to allow you to look up things like high explosive templates, weapon profiles, and hit modifiers very, very quickly. I've been playing bolt action for a year and a half now, and we still find ourselves looking at that rules reference guide multiple times every game. It's something that is included in the rulebook, but it's nice to have 2 of them so you don't have to continuously pass that book back and forth between both players. After that, we're going to have a few tools that are going to play in with the bolt action rules set. The first of which being 12 plastic pin markers. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really find myself ever using these things, and I don't see many other bolt action players using these. At least not for their intended purpose. As you may or may not know, in bolt action there is a system of pinning that is effectively suppression and is going to affect how your troops perform in combat. And each time you receive fire, you gain a pin marker on a unit, and that's what these little red blast markers are meant to indicate. They have a little dial on them which you can turn, and there's numbers on that dial to reflect how many pin markers a unit has. The problem is that the engravings are all very small and very difficult to read from tabletop height. Almost every game of bolt action I've played with multiple players, we all end up just using red Chessex dice to indicate pin markers. It's just much more efficient and easier to read. However, I do see these being used as markers for incoming artillery or airstrikes, so they're not totally useless, but overall, they're something that's just a little bit, I don't know, impractical. A clever but flawed design from Warlord Games. But these are usually paired with the plastic template and tokens, and while I will say that the tokens in this are more or less useless, that high explosive template that has the 2 circles overlapping each other displays all 4 high explosive profiles, and is pretty useful to have on hand. Although again, it's not necessary, it is something that can be measured with a regular tape measure. And that's honestly a bit ironic because a tape measure is a tool that you will absolutely need to play bolt action, and it is the one tool that is not included in this box set. It's also worth noting that these plastic pin markers and plastic templates and tokens come on sprues, are oftenly sold together, and go on sale very frequently. They're very much a garnish to bolt action and not necessary tools. Though I would say if you absolutely need any, grab the HE template. It's not necessary but definitely useful to have on hand. And after that we have 10 6-sided dice. These are generic D6, ranging from 1 to 6 with their little pips, just like you would see on the craps table at MGM, or in a game of Monopoly. Nothing special or flashy, but it's definitely something that you're going to need to play the game. And these are actually pretty nice to have on hand, because you're going to find that bolt action is going to need to use a lot of dice as markers as you play more games. And even though a player like myself has my awesome Afrika Korps, Fallschirmjäger, or British 8th Army dice, I still do carry around a bunch of Chessex dice to use as pin markers, wound counters, mortar zeroing, and other things of the sort. It's great to have cheap and different colored dice on hand. And after playing bolt action for a while, I really don't think you can actually play the game properly if you don't have 3 sets of dice. 4 if you include the orders dice. So these are going to be very necessary for new players, but also a very welcome addition to players who are going to be sticking around in the game for a while, as they're going to need extra dice for random niche markers. And lastly, we get 10 order dice, 5 of which are the Dunkelgrau for the Germans, and 5 of which are the Olive Drab for the US faction. And while almost every bolt action player you see is going to be using order dice, they're not actually a necessity if you're playing with a small communal group. You can just buy different colored Chessex die. As long as they're the same size, you can use them as your order pool. However, it is nice to have these die here, but I do have one major complaint, and that's that you only get 5 in the starter sets. If you really want to have your own bolt action army, you really do need to buy an order die set and have 12 order die of coordinating color. And this is definitely one of the main points of frustration that really makes me kind of sour on the Band of Brothers starter set, where you're only going to get 10 dice total. That's really not an acceptable amount of order dice once you get above 500-point games, and players are going to be forced to buy more order dice down the road, and then they're going to have a set of 12 order dice with 5 other order dice that are just kind of awkwardly sitting there in their collection. Now, if this set came with 6 of the olive order die and then 6 of the gray order die, you could at least combine those in and say, this is my faction's order dice, and say I'm playing a Soviet faction and my other opponent is a new player who just has the Band of Brothers starter set and a box of German Grenadiers on top of that. He could say, hey, those red dice are your activation dice, and these olive drab and gray dice are mine, so if we pull one and it's not red, it is my activation. It's something I've done before, and it's very much acceptable. But with only 10 die, you're still not really going to be able to do that. The only thing I really see these dice being useful for in long terms is if you're a player who really loses a lot of items every time you go into the hobby shop, and this way you can have 5 extra order die to replace them and make sure you always have 12 no matter what. Aside from that, it's a sort of frustrating limitation that I think kind of counters the point of buying a starter set in the first place. So you can see I'm kind of split on the contents of this box. But let's go ahead and take a look at the value that you're getting here. And first up on that list is going to be the Bolt Action 2nd edition rulebook, which if you buy the large hardback version is going to be $40 if you get it not on sale from the website. However, that does also come with a miniature, and it is the hardback version. More comparable, we can look at the PDF version that is currently on sale for $16. But you do also get the rules reference sheet in the starter sets, So we're going to go ahead and just give this box set the benefit of the doubt and say that you're getting a $40 bargain on the Bolt Action 2nd edition rulebook. After that, we have the templates, tokens, and pin marker set, which is going to run you $16. Then we have the order die, which I've kind of bundled into the price of a single order die, which, again, you're not getting 12 order dice. But for the sake of this tallying, we're going to say that you're getting a $25 value there. And then we have the Ruined Farmhouse, which again is a $25 value for that set of terrain. Then we have the SDKFC 251-10 Hanomag. That's going to be a $29 model. And then we're going to have the Infantry Sprues, which is 6 sprues at $10 each for a total of $60. So on face value there, this is going to be a $195 value that you're getting for just $112. But like I said, it's not quite that. I was a little bit generous in that tallying, and we're going to go ahead and run down that list and look at everything in there. First of all, the rulebook. It is not the hardback rulebook version. You are not getting the free model with it. And at the moment, while I'm recording this video, the ebook and PDF version of the rulebook are on sale for just $16. So that's already chopping $24 off of that quote-unquote bargain that we're getting here. Next, we have the templates and tokens, which are $16. And like I said, you just don't need to play with these. You do not need them at all, especially those red pin markers. And while it is nice to have that HE template, it's also something that goes on sale every time the sprue sale comes around, which means you're going to be able to get that at half off. And if you get this item with just the HE template and token profile and not with the pin markers, you're probably only going to be paying about $4 for this. And really, that's chopping another $12 off of that quote-unquote bargain value here. And next, we're going to have the order dice. And the order dice for a pack of 12 is $25, which personally I think is overpriced as it is. But the fact that you're going to have to buy a whole new pack of order dice on top of the starter set because it just flat out doesn't come with enough means that I don't really think you're getting that $25 bargain at all here with this. And next we have the Ruined Farmhouse model, and while I think this is a decent piece of terrain, there's no way I would pay $25 for it. It's a very old kit that does not fit together very well, it doesn't have a large footprint on the battlefield, and it has very, very poor line of sight blocking capabilities, which is probably the most important feature you should look for in terrain. And after that, we're on to the actual models that you're going to be using in your army, and the first is that SDKFC 251-10. And this is the Hanomag with that extra Pack 36 upgrade, which is going to cost $29. And honestly, I think this is a pretty fair price for the model. I personally wouldn't pay for it. I'd much rather spend $20 on a Tamiya 148 half-track. But I know a lot of players prefer the more durable Italieri 156 kits that Warlord sells. But I do think this is a relatively fair price point, especially when you consider that you can swap out that light anti-tank gun mounted on the pintle there for a medium machine gun and run it as a standard Hanomag. And next we have the 2 German Grenadier sprues and the 4 US Airborne sprues that are priced at $10 each. And while I have no problems paying $10 for 6 extra infantry models to flesh out your units, when you're buying them in bulk like this, it's really not a great deal at $10 per sprue. Especially when you consider that there is an annual sprue sale that sells these things at 50%. So you can basically chop that bargain right in half down the middle from $60 down to $30 if you're patient and savvy and wait for the sprue sale. That being said, you could always just buy box sets and get a ton more infantry for about the same price. So overall, I think the quote-unquote bargain that you get with this box set is really gimmicky, and I'm very much not a fan of it, and I have no problem being vocal about that. I love Warlord games, but when I look at this, it is just not a good starter set. And really, you're going to be paying full price for not a great volume of models. And the free stuff you're going to get attached to that is just more or less a bunch of junk that you don't need. And really, I think the order dice is the worst part about this, as it's going to require you to just make another $25 purchase down the road. And to me, that's just the antithesis of a starter kit. Starter kits should get you some models and all the tools you need to play for an affordable price, so you don't feel like you're spending your money on things like rulers and dice and text and books. There's supposed to be a method to get players into the game without feeling bad about spending money on items that are potentially temporary and do not become a part of their collection. When you look at other games like Star Wars Legion, you are getting more or less all the models in those starter sets for half off, and then you're getting all of the rules, rulers, measurement tools, and dice for free with it. And while I scoffed at the idea of having those unique dice for Star Wars Legion at first, their starter set at least gives you a workable amount that you're going to be able to use later on should you buy more. So if you're watching this video to get an idea as to whether you should enter Bolt Action with the Band of Brothers starter set, my main suggestion is no. There are better starter sets out there, and your money is best spent elsewhere, especially when you look at other sets like the El Alamein box set. You're getting way more models for just a little bit more money, and the overall bargain value of that box set isn't wasted on relatively unnecessary tools. But if you already have the Band of Brothers starter set, don't let me get too down on it. It's not like you're throwing money down the drain. You're still getting a decent amount of models for some money, along with the tools you need to play Bolt Action. But now that we understand the contents of the box set and my overall grievance with it, let's go ahead and look at the limitations that we're going to have to work with inside this box set in order to make two balanced fighting forces. So the first and most obvious here is going to be the model count. We only have 6 sprues of infantry and a very asymmetrical 12 grenadiers against 24 US airborne figures. And while I think 4 sprues of US airborne is a good place to start with a faction, only having 12 grenadiers is just going to be very, very hard to field out an entire game with. That being said, if you're completely new to the hobby and if you've never painted before, having only 12 models to worry about assembling and painting might be a very, very good thing for people who get easily overwhelmed by large amounts of plastic. And really, I don't mean that in a mocking way. Having a small pile of models in front of you is going to let you get the stuff on your table done and prevent you from accumulating what we call a pile of shame. But that limitation in models is going to be pretty disparaging, especially for the German force, and we're going to have to compensate them with a few other tricks when we come to list building down the road. But our next limitation, which I've already touched on, is the 5 activation dice. We cannot have more than 5 units fielded by either of these forces at once. Now, that's no problem for the Germans, seeing as they only have 13 models overall, but for the US Airborne, that's going to hold them back a little bit in some fields. And after that, we have the fact that we need to field these factions in reinforced platoons. And a reinforced platoon is more or less an army structure that all forces in Bolt Action need to abide to. And usually, they're a limit that restricts factions in getting more things in their list. But here we more or less have an inverse of that problem, where the reinforced platoon is going to force you into building certain units, as you need a standard HQ and 2 troop choices in order to run a Bolt Action list. And lastly, we have the limitation that is going to be points for these factions. And in a usual game of Bolt Action, you can say, we're running a 1,000-point game or a 500-point game, and your list cannot exceed that points value. But with such a limited amount of models that come in this box set, we're in the unique situation where if you're running a 250-point game, you're probably not going to be able to take a reinforced platoon. Alternatively, nothing in the starter set is going to be able to reach 500 points comfortably. So, with the Band of Brothers box set, we're in this weird scenario where rather than meeting a point limit, we're going to have to make these factions match each other in points that's going to settle in the high 300 point range. So, taking those 4 limitations into consideration, it's no wonder that a lot of new players ask the forums on how to build this box set. And really, I do think that's kind of a shortcoming overall with the Band of Brothers starter set, because with the El Alamein starter set, you can kind of build those sprues however you want, and you'll likely still end up with a suitable 500-point list. But that's not the case here, and we're going to go ahead and jump into a quick overview of how we're going to make these limited models fit into the demands of the Bolt Action rule set. And first up here, we have the German faction with that very limited 12 model count. So we're going to have a veteran force with very small squads, and we're going to equip them with a lot of armaments and upgrades that are going to kind of max out those points in order to match the more fleshed out US forces. They're also going to be run by an Oberlieutenant, which is going to be a first lieutenant. He's more expensive, higher ranking officer, and he's going to benefit your army's morale and overall coordination a little bit better. And lastly, they do have that half-track support with the SDKFZ 251-10 Hanomag. It doesn't quite make up for the lack of infantry, but it's definitely something to consider because it is going to be played. And aside them, we have our US faction that definitely has a little more leeway, and we're going to be able to build some large rifle squads with them. They are going to be airborne veterans, however, and while they're not going to be nearly as heavily equipped as the Germans, they are going to have some upgrades where the squad leaders are going to be taking some machine guns, and they're going to have a Browning automatic rifle upgrade in their squad. They're also going to emphasize on mobile firepower, making use of those rifles and BARs while on the move, and they're going to be led by a second lieutenant, which is the lower ranking officer in the game, and he's going to have 2 assistants alongside him to give him some ablative wounds, keep him alive longer, and also turn him into a fighting force in his own regard. So for this review, I'm going to mention that we are going to be using the Easy Army list builder, which is free online to use. I recommend you guys check it out, and I recommend you guys support them because it is a great asset to have on hand. If you're on a mobile, you also have Battlescribe, which is another free list building asset. Both are very, very useful, and I recommend that you make use of either or. But if you do, definitely consider supporting them. And in this video, I'm going to be using a list build from Easy Army for both the US and the German faction that's going to break down their points, costs, and equipments. But alongside that, I'm also going to give you guys a visual representation of what I would equip on each model for the squad. And that's going to be a basic kind of loadout screen where it's going to be each weapon representing a squad member. And feel free to screenshot and share both about the internet as you please. They are meant here as a community tool, so feel free to screenshot it, save it, share it, and use it to help build your Band of Brothers box set. But with no further ado, we're going to move on and look at what I would build for the German side of the Band of Brothers box sets. And first up here, we are going to have in our HQ slots a veteran first lieutenant, which is an Oberleutnant for the German army. This is the higher ranking variant of the junior officer, and while he may not be much of a fighting force on his own, he is going to allow you to snap 2 your other units, which is going to be 2 for his rank, and then an additional 1 for the German Army Blitzkrieg special rule. So that's going to help leverage things in the Germans' favor, despite them not having favorable numbers. However, with no bodyguards, the German player is going to need to focus on defending his commander and keeping him alive. And as far as equipping weapons on your officer goes, he gets all the weapons for free, so if you want the most bang for your buck, you can throw an assault rifle on him. But if you're not being competitive and you want a more thematic list, feel free to equip him with a pistol, an MP40, or a rifle. It's really your choice here. This guy is a one-man unit, and he's going to be more focused on commanding rather than fighting the enemy. But as I mentioned earlier, we do also need 2 infantry slots in this reinforced platoon, and the first of which is going to be our quote-unquote assault squad. And this is going to be a 5-man squad of veteran grenadiers. And all 5 of them, including the NCO, are going to be taking assault rifles. And these assault rifles are the STG-44s as represented on the grenadier sprue. And this is going to be a small but kind of front-loaded squad that's going to cost you 90 points, but pack a hell of a lot of a punch when they do attack. However, with only 5 men, they aren't going to be super durable, and you're going to need to play these guys wisely. And overall, I think this is going to be a good unit to show players how to properly play offensive strategies, as you will be either rewarded or punished based on how well you use them. But in our second infantry slot, we have a little bit more of a traditional sediment unit, and this is going to be a 6-man veteran grenadier squad with 2 light machine gunners in it. And this, of course, is going to make 2 of those riflemen loaders for the light machine gun. All of which comes in on a relatively expensive 118 points. So here you're going to have a relatively smaller squad, but one that's going to be able to put out a lot of firepower from long range. And this should educate the German player on how to use a sort of fire support team to cover another advancing squadron. Again, both squads are top heavy in points, but it's kind of what you have to do here since you're only getting 2 sprues. That being said, with 5 assault rifles, 4 regular rifles, and 2 light machine guns, you're building a pretty solid base for your German army. And these models will definitely still be used as you expand into the game. And lastly, we have the Hanomag Half-Track, which is the 251/10 variant, which sports the light AT gun and a smaller transport capacity. Now, I'm going to recommend that you just don't run this variant, and instead you run the regular 251 Hanomag with a medium machine gun pintle mounted on the front. According to my sources, the kit is going to allow you to peg fit and swap out either or, and it's nice to have both, but I think 9 times out of 10 you are going to be running just the transport variants, which at a regular veterancy is going to come in at 89 points. And while I do like sprinkling light AT guns throughout a list, there's really no point in the Band of Brothers set, as the US don't have a vehicle. Also, transports aren't the best platform for single-shot anti-tank weapons, as you are going to be moving the transport up to getting troops into position, and then your single-shot weapon is going to be suffering hit modifiers, which is going to reduce its effectiveness on the battlefield. The Hanomag is overall a great transport, and with a medium machine gun, it can be a great infantry support vehicle, but one that is just not befitting for that light anti-tank gun. So take it at regular veterancy with the regular medium machine gun pintle mounted as a regular SDKFC 251/1 Hanomag. It's also worth noting that's going to keep your transport capacity up at 12, which is going to allow you to fit your entire army into that Hanomag if you wish. But with points aside, let's go ahead and look at an overview of the German build for the Band of Brothers starter set. First of all, we're going to have our HQ, which is going to be the Oberlieutenants or First Lieutenants, and you can more or less equip him with whatever you want, but I would recommend a submachine gun to maximize on that free weapon upgrade. And first up in our infantry category, we are going to have a 5-man veteran grenadier squad, all of which are going to be sporting the STG-44 assault rifle. And supporting them, we're going to have a 2nd infantry squad that's going to be a 6-man squadron with an NCO with a rifle, 2 loaders with a rifle, 1 regular rifleman, and then 2 gunners wielding MG42s. And lastly, of course, we are going to have the 251 Hanomag, which is going to be equipped with the regular MMG at 89 points. And this is going to be the only unit in your list that's run at a veterancy of regular. So as always, feel free to pause the video here or screenshot this image. It should help you equip your infantry models. And once we're done with that, we're going to move along and look at what I recommend building the US side of this box set with. And as always, the first mandatory slot on our reinforced platoon is going to be the officer. And for the US, we are going to take a 2nd lieutenant at veterancy rank. That is the lower lieutenant, but he is still a veteran, which is going to rack in at 65 points. But wait, there's more. We are going to give him 2 veteran assistants that are going to be an additional 13 points, bringing the unit up to a total of 91. And while that 2nd lieutenant isn't going to have the commanding prowess of an Oberleutnant, you are going to have a 3-man veteran squad which you will be able to equip with submachine guns. And I recommend you do just that. So your command squad here is not just going to be snapping to one other infantry unit and giving a small morale boost. He's also going to be a little bit of a strike force on his own. Definitely a contrast to that German Oberleutnant. But with that squad kitted out, we're going to move along to our infantry slot, and here we're actually going to have 2 identical squads, being veteran paratrooper squads of the late war variation. And this is going to be an 8-man squad sporting a submachine gun on the NCO and 1 Browning automatic rifle, or BAR. And at 120 points, you're going to have a pretty durable squad that's going to be able to put out a lot of firepower, especially when you consider that fire maneuver rule that the US faction has. And as I previously said, there is going to be 2 clone units of these making up your 2 infantry slots for that reinforced platoon, each of which comes in at 120 points for a total of 240 points. And lastly, supporting all of them, we are going to have 1 veteran medium machine gun team. And at 65 points, you are getting a 3-man machine gun team on a firing base modeled with the Browning 30 cal. And look, I know medium machine guns aren't very popular in bolt action, and they're not really worth 65 points. But in this scenario, we're going to allow it because the US is going to pull a little bit ahead in the points here, and I think it is good to have a medium machine gun and the US faction just so they know how support units and artillery models work when it comes to advance orders and run orders. However, when modeling this unit, I would recommend building it with 2 guys on the large base and 1 extra loader on the side base. That way, if you want, you can mesh them back in with a regular infantry squad and use it as an LMG if you wish. And that's going to be it for a US faction, but you're going to realize that is only 22 models. We are going to have 2 extra models, and what I recommend you do here is to build 2 models of whatever you didn't build in your HQ slot. So if you made your officer and his 2 assistants have submachine guns, build 2 riflemen here in case you want to field riflemen in that command slot instead of submachine guns. However, you could also use one of those models, add him in with that MMG squad, and run it as a heavy machine gun. It would cost a bit more, but honestly HMGs are overpriced, and I think for the scenario it would be okay. It would also give you a nice introduction to armor penetration values, especially when interacting with the Hanomag. But if you don't wish to do that, you could also just make 2 extra Browning automatic riflemen out of them. You probably won't be able to run them in these scenarios, but it's a future investment as the US are always going to want to make use of those BARs. They mesh incredibly well with their fire and maneuver national trait. But if what I just said seems really overwhelming to you, just make 2 extra riflemen. Every army always needs more riflemen, and when you build further squads in the future, it's going to help you flesh them out. But with that being said, we're going to move along and look at our visual reference guide for building the US side of this box. And at the top we are going to have the headquarters option, and that is going to be a second lieutenant and 2 assistants, all of which are going to be sporting the Thompson submachine gun. Again, this is going to make them a sort of light assault squad that's really going to help out your force where it's needed. Next to that, we are going to have the 2 extra riflemen though, should you want to play a more command presence role and sit in the backfield and shoot your enemies from a distance. But below that, we're going to have our infantry, and we're going to have 2 clone squads here, which is going to be an 8-man squad with an NCO sporting a submachine gun and 1 Browning automatic rifle, followed up by another 6 men with the M1 Garands. Now, feel free to use the M1 carbines in lieu of the M1 Garands. They have the same rules in bolt action, and both represent rifles. And lastly, we're going to have that support squad with the Browning 30 cal machine gun, supported by 2 loaders. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want, you can take one of those extra riflemen, throw them on this unit, and field it as an HMG. Again, feel free to pause the video here if you're building your starter set, or screenshot it and save it for later. But let's go ahead and size up these 2 builds. On the German side, we have a total of 387 points, with 4 activations, which again is that Oberleutnant, a 5-man assault rifle squad, a 6-man squad with 2 LMGs, and that standard Hanomag half-track. On the US side, we have a comparable 396 points, 4 activations, led by that 2nd lieutenant with his staff, an 8-man rifle team with an SMG and bar, another 8-man rifle team with the exact same loadout, an SMG and a BAR, and then a medium machine gun or HMG supporting them. Now off the bat, we see that the US does have 10 more points in their list than the German faction, but that is spent on a medium machine gun team with veterancy rank, which is honestly an incredibly overcosted unit, so I think the difference in points is acceptable, even if you upgrade it to an HMG. And overall, this should give you a nice, even balanced game right out of the box, using only the models in the Band of Brothers starter sets. The only thing you really need to add on top of this is just a tape measure, and you should be good to play. And this should honestly keep you entertained for a couple games before you feel the need to buy more models and expand your collection. But overall, I hope this guide was useful, whether you want to look into buying this core set or just building the contents within it. I know I was pretty down on this box set for most of the early part of this video, but it isn't the worst thing ever. And if you're looking to get into wargaming for the first time and you're not sure if you're going to like building and painting models, having such a small amount of them is pretty manageable, and it's going to allow you to recoup your losses if you feel like you're not going to enjoy this as a hobby, or if you just have a change of heart and decide to play a different faction. But if you are a veteran player looking to expand your collections, or a player who wants to start their own army and isn't going in on this box set with somebody else, I would definitely recommend a plethora of other Warlord products before this one. And I know there is a construction guide for the Band of Brothers box set, but I haven't been able to find it myself on the internet. And honestly, if it tells you to put a LMG in the US infantry squads instead of a BAR and that light AT gun on the Hanomag, I'm just going to kind of disregard it from the get-go. I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from with that, but I think most US players and German players would agree. If not, or if you disagree with anything I recommended in the list build for this video in general, please do leave a comment below and explain your reasoning. Please take into consideration the limitations of this box set, like the order die, the points, the reinforced platoon, and the very, very limited amount of models that you get in this box. But all feedback is appreciated. And if you guys want to see more content like this, go ahead and hit subscribe, consider turning on notifications, leave a like if you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Of course, feel free to screenshot any of the clips in here. And until next time guys, take care.